Welcome to the Trailblazers. I'm Perry Rurick, your host and chief editor of Follow Your Buyer. The purpose of this interview series is to share with you interesting discussions I have with trailblazing thought leaders. They're innovative, thought-provoking. They're not afraid to challenge the status quo, and they serve as vanguards for positive transformation. My trailblazer guest today is Jennifer Kingsley. She is the Chief Commercial Officer at Vintabio. They are a contract development and manufacturing organization serving in one of the most fascinating industries and markets. And that's bringing cell and gene therapies from discovery through commercial manufacturing. She's not only a trailblazer, but Vintabio is a trailblazing company in a trailblazing industry. And it doesn't get much harder. They are not just treating symptoms, but they're curing diseases. It's one of the hardest things that this industry is attempting to do. Jennifer has nearly 30 years experience in life sciences, and has worked with companies like Life Technologies, SAFC, and Cytiva before joining Vintabio about a year ago. She has mastered a world that requires exceptional perseverance, in which sales cycles are often measured in years. The business relationships are extremely complex and critically important to the outcomes, and there's much weighing on those successful outcomes. What she does in the cell and gene space, it's challenging to say the least, and it's not for the intellectually timid. Jennifer, welcome to the Trailblazers.
Thanks, Perry. It's great to be here. I really appreciate the invitation.
All right, Jennifer, many in our audience are not familiar with cell and gene therapies, even though they may work in the pharmaceutical industry. So can you explain what cell and gene therapies are and why is it such a big deal?
Yeah, so, I have to answer this question, I want to take a little bit of a time machine and go back to when I was starting my career, up to 30 years ago. And that was in the time frame vhere all of the rage and the talk was about sequencing the genome and all the promise that that held for the medical community. Craig Venter was having his moment in time, very provocatively out there in the media talking about sequencing the genome, and it was like science fiction, right? And so now you fast forward 25, 30 years, and this is what's actually going on in the reality today in science. And it's really exciting. And it's really exciting to be part of the process and see it come full circle. So, Perry, the uniqueness in this therapeutic area is really that it's a cell going back into a patient to become part of the immune system, or in the case of what we do at Vintabio, it's actually looking at how do you deliver a gene. So a gene that has a mutation, and you're able to fix the mutation and then deliver it into the body for the therapeutic cure, which is why this is so unique, and partly why it's also challenging to the developers as well, because there's always the risk of an immune response. Some of the challenges back in I think it was the 80s or the 90s with the original gene therapies were an immune response, but so much of an immune response that it actually caused some patient deaths. And so this is a unique kind of almost a relaunch of gene therapies currently right now, having learned from all of the different things that they did over the course of about 2 decades in the industry. So it's such an exciting and promising field. And it's for me, it's been really wonderful to see it come full circle. And it's a little bit where science and science fiction meet for me.
Oh, I love that. Science and science fiction. And this is curing diseases. We're eradicating disease in certain
Absolutely.
cases.
Yeah, in certain cases, I think in some cases people need multiple treatments over the course of maybe their life, but you can literally go in and, when I was studying biology as an undergraduate, I just remember remarking actually to one of my professors how amazing it was that just the littlest mutation in one gene could just completely change somebody's course of life, and they could have a very, very debilitating disease, sometimes often led to early premature death. I mean, it's just amazing what one little mutation can do. And so this type of therapy is amazing because it basically comes and delivers the corrected piece of DNA into the person's body and lets their body kind of incorporate that back into their genome and literally fix the disease and fix the disease state. And that might be a little bit of an oversimplification. A clinician or doctor could probably go into a little bit more detail, but at a very high level, that's basically what we're doing when we're working with gene therapies.
Amazing. The impact of this is just incredible. So if it's not obvious, you talked about it's a challenging space. What are some of the more specific challenges as we approach this radically different approach to drug therapy? Maybe that's not even an accurate term anymore.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think from a patient perspective, one of the primary challenges is, again, that immune response. And, if you're incorporating something into the body, it's kind of similar to organ rejection, which I think is commonly maybe a little bit more widely understood. It's not that different from that concept or idea. So from a patient standpoint, you want to be careful about delivering something that could cause such an immune response that you couldn't recover from it. But then from a manufacturing standpoint, the bioprocessing of these molecules and how you make them to basically be able to be delivered is new-ish. It's new and it's evolving. The development cycle in bioprocessing and biotech always is evolving, but this is, it's a newer technology that's literally evolving right now. And that is one of the challenges as well. How do you scale it? How do you make it high quality? How do you make enough that you can, reach patients that might have, a large patient population like hemophilia? Sometimes when you get into ultra rare diseases, you could literally make one manufacturing batch that could treat the entire world's population of this particular genetic defect. So there's a lot of different balances in the industry right now, and how do you approach each type of patient population, and how do you manufacture the drug? Are you making enough? Maybe you don't need a whole lot. There's a lot of questions kind of out there that people are working through.
Incredible. So without divorcing ourselves entirely from the science, we're going to shift
Yeah.
a little more to the business landscape.
Okay.
So CDMOs and drug sponsors and those complex relationships aren't new, but certainly CDMOs that participate in the cell and gene space are kind of new. So can you just tell us what's going on, and of course, against the backdrop of we can't let go of COVID and all the
Right.
disruption there. So what's that landscape look like?
Yeah, so I can't underestimate how much this is still a new frontier in medicine, and it's really in its early stages. And what you see from a development standpoint is, there's thousands of molecules in the cell and gene therapy space that are being worked on in various stages of clinical development, from preclinical all the way through. But I think right now, currently, at the end of the day, we only have about 5 drugs that are commercially available to patients. We have a lot of things in the clinics. We have a lot of things in the very early stages of the clinic. I think it's something like 90% of the molecules that are being developed today, 90% of those things are in the very earliest stages. So they're right out of the discovery R&D labs, and maybe in the very early stages, maybe having just planning on coming and doing a phase 1 clinical trial, which is the first time something sees an actual human in the clinical development cycle. And so where we see the development coming from is really in the academic space. And really, if you take a step back and you think about the development of drugs across the board, a lot of the big blockbuster drugs that we have today that are biologic drugs actually did originate in an academic institution somewhere. And so that model hasn't changed much. A lot of the innovation is actually happening in the academic space. Sometimes those academic labs will spin out a small biotech. Sometimes the biotech will start and they'll tech transfer a technology in, or maybe they happen to have, maybe the inventor of the therapy is in that and starts a biotech company. But my end point is really that a lot of that innovation is being done out of the translational academic type of labs or in a small biotech. And so what you find is that those companies or entities don't necessarily have the resources that a large pharmaceutical company would have. And so they need to outsource. And so they reach out to organizations like Vintabio to help them develop their drug, understand how to make it for the clinical patient from a quality perspective and a regulatory perspective. And they really can reach out as an extension of their organization to partner with a CMO and CDMO to help get them into the clinic and ultimately into patients. And so that's that. And it's not different from drug development from before. Perhaps it's a little different today in the marketplace just because there's so much of an emphasis on the development that's in these early stage biotechs, and they just don't have the resources to have, the teams of people and the manufacturing plant themselves. It takes a lot of capital to have a manufacturing facility. And so you see kind of those trends going on in the marketplace today.
That's a great explanation of this just complex environment and all the relationships. And you did, and there's a regulatory layer to
Right.
all of this as well.
Yes.
So it's very, very difficult. So, so as drug sponsors, they're always concerned about, do you have the capability? Does this CDMO have the capability? And do they have the capacity to take on my project?
That's right.
So and that's kind of an equation, and numbers are always changing. Is there enough? Is the capability, are the capabilities true? Is there enough capacity to meet the needs of all of these? And it's a hard environment to understand where all of these discoveries are coming from.
Yeah, it's very dynamic, I have to say. And I think, and you mentioned COVID before, Perry. We can't forget that COVID happened and the impact that it had in our industry. And so, as we went into COVID, one of the constraints in the cell and gene space was certain type, capacity for CMO, capacity to have plasmids made, which are basically the key element of manufacturing a cell and gene therapy. And so what we ended up seeing was a lot of investment flood the marketplace, and a lot of these companies were able to start and present a lot of capacity into the marketplace. So I would say at this point in time, what are we, 3 years later, 3 to 4 years later, we actually have a lot of capacity online. Now the question is shifting to capability. So the people that are inside of those CMOs, do they have the expertise and the know-how to actually work on a cell and gene therapy? At the crux of it, we have a lot of people in the industry that have immense knowledge from a regulatory standpoint, from a process standpoint. If their knowledge is based on a biological, background and their legacy and their history, they have to relearn cell and gene, because at the end of the day, you basically have a monoclonal antibody or a protein that's mimicking a protein in the body versus a virus that is the delivery agent for the cell and gene therapy. So everything is different. You have to purify it different, you have to manufacture it different. And if you're coming from a background where you have a biologic background, you know how to make monoclonal antibodies, but that doesn't always 100% translate into making the virus or the vector that actually delivers the payload of genetic material to the patient. So
Uncle, I'm crying uncle. That is so, it blows my mind how different this is. So capabilities. So as a drug sponsor, you got to look carefully at testing for take capabilities in the CDMOs.
Yeah, you really do. You want to make sure that the people that are doing the work have experience doing that work. Best case scenario, I'm not trying to say that somebody can't learn it and come up to speed really quickly when they're a scientist, because a lot of the principles are a lot of the same. Bioreactors are sometimes the same. There's a lot of similarities. I'm just saying that there is a learning curve. There's definitely a learning curve. And I remember as we were bringing in one of our scientists into Vintabio that's in the area, I remember having that conversation with him because his earliest days of his career outside of college, he was working for big pharma, he was working in the biologics division, and he was basically, elbow deep in working on traditional proteins with traditional processes, which just because they've been around a long time, they're more characterized, they're more understood. And then as he took his next step in his career, he went to a cell and gene company, and he commented, I said, "How did you do that?" in the interview. And he commented how difficult it was, and that there was a significant learning curve because it is just so different. So I think one of the key things, at least from my perspective, is making sure that the CMO has the capability and the talent underneath their roof to understand the nuances of both the product development cycle, which is a little bit different than the technical, and the actual technical manufacturing differences. I think it would set someone up for success for sure.
I want to kind of shift a little bit and maybe have a little bit of a sidebar conversation.
Okay.
You're in one of those unique positions due to your experience that you've been a seller, you've been on the
Yes.
business development side of
Yes.
things, and now you find yourself in a buyer's
Yeah.
seat oftentimes, and part of that complex buying team. Can you talk a little bit about what you've learned and maybe a little bit about if, you know, what worked well when you were a seller or what you wish you knew
Yeah, right.
when you were a seller?
Yeah, yeah. And so let me just take a step backwards. So as I came over to Vintabio, it was a great time in my career because I had, had so many different experiences within big companies within the life science space that sold product. In some cases into that discovery space, but later on in my career, pre-Vintabio, it was actually selling to people who were doing the manufacturing. And so it was really interesting coming over to Vintabio. One of my goals was to get closer to the patients, but what I didn't expect was I'm now on the other side of the table. So as people come in to sell products and services to Vintabio, I've just identified some things like maybe it's in the wish I knew category, or wow, I did that in my past life, and this is why I had such success with it. And it's really interesting, but it really, from what I've seen so far as I've been at Vintabio, I think there are two kind of key lessons that I wanted to share with you today. And one is that, you know, people are really busy. I don't think I ever understood on the other side of the table how busy people were. So even if you have a great relationship with someone as a seller, there could be a lot of stuff going on in the background, political things, work that's, not working out so well, or just the amount of work could be increased for a period of time, and you just don't have line of sight to that. And I can honestly tell you, if people want to meet with you or do business with you, then they will absolutely reach out to you. And sometimes it's all of a sudden someone will reach out to you because they need you. And it's really just, I think, have grace with people and make sure that you understand that they might just be busy, and it might not be you. Of course, we're under, as salespeople, a lot more pressure maybe than even when I started my career with the um, tools that are now in place like Salesforce and, funnel management. And there's just a lot more visibility into what a business development or a salesperson does on the day to day. And so I think it's almost like a balancing act of how do you inform people and give the right visibility to someone, but then also understand that maybe your client is just busy and they can't get back to you. So that is one lesson that I've learned. And then the other thing that actually came out of a situation just recently where we were tracking we needed to get some materials in, and we were tracking when they would come in, and it was important, and it was definitely had impact to when we could do something that we were planning. And there was, of course, one thing that we needed, and it was really interesting. I was in a meeting, and we weren't getting great communication from that supplier. And so you'd be in a meeting, and it's like, what's the update? And then, well, I need to go talk to them or chase them or find out what's going on. And I think that the sellers or salespeople who can over communicate and make sure that they give their people who are reaching out to them timely information, but almost proactively and ahead of time, so that when somebody's sitting in a meeting, they can answer the question. They can say, I know exactly what's going on. This is exactly the update that's going on, because it puts people at ease, and it helps, it basically helps somebody look good. And I think when you understand that that's something that you can help one of your buyers with, then it becomes a really important kind of way of working that you should definitely incorporate. And I kind of saw it on the other side of the table, and I can now definitely see where if people over communicate, especially when something has urgency and there are stakes or potential delays in a schedule, it's just worth its weight in gold if you communicate. And even if it's no new update, it's still something. So those were kind of the two things that I've seen already.
As you were describing that second point, I think of the value that can be delivered beyond just goods and services.
Yeah.
Really understanding what's important to your buyer and delivering some value like a partner would, not just
Yeah.
somebody selling you something.
Yeah, like I think when people are invested in their buyers' projects, initiatives, it just changes the dynamic between that business relationship. And my mantra has always been that people do business with people. But when people really step up and feel connected with their buyer, I think that's when it works the best. So
We're going to take a short break. I'm
okay.
speaking with Jennifer Kingsley. She's the Chief Commercial Officer at Vintabio. She is the trailblazer today, and we'll be right back. I'm back with Jennifer Kingsley. She is the Chief Commercial Officer at Vintabio, a contract development and manufacturing organization in the cell and gene pharmaceutical space. Jennifer, I want to shift gears and talk a little bit more about where Vintabio fits in this complex environment you've been talking to us about.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about Vintabio and what you do.
Yeah, so I think the best way to talk about Vintabio is actually to tell a little bit of the origin story of Vintabio. So Vintabio's founders have been in the field working on gene therapy since before it was a thing. A long time ago. And one of our founders basically developed the technology, but she did it over time. So I think it's a little bit of taking the first kind of initial process, and she's basically worked her entire career to simplify it, make it more efficient, produce more vector in a simplified stream. And she's developed a couple pieces of technology along the way that are unique to Vintabio. But it was always, she doesn't have a lot of patience for things when they are, she just wants to simplify things and just work, get on with it. And so what we've ended up with is basically some technology, and they identified a gap in the industry where her founders, I should also note, are from UPenn, and the UPenn umbrella. And they identified a gap in the industry where there wasn't always continuity between what somebody would do in research and then what somebody needed to do as they went into human patients. And so they wanted to start Vintabio under the premise basically to help people, innovators who are trying to translate their drugs into the clinic or their ideas into the clinic. And so they started Vintabio. Ultimately it comes down to an innovator wants to use, if they're using a vector that's produced for research, you want to minimize the number of variables as you go into toxicology studies and then as you go into the clinical space. And that is how Vintabio started. And now, as we came into it, we really got into the technology a little bit more to understand kind of what is unique about it, what makes it unique. We're in the process of filing some patents on some of the technology, and we're just in the process of bringing in clients. So we are bringing on our facility, and we're in a stage now where we're looking for collaborators to really come in to use our technology and use it to produce their vector. And we can provide it from a research and discovery phase for someone all the way through to first in human.
So, Jennifer, I met you and became aware of Vintabio at the Outsourced Pharma Capacity Update not long ago. And I was astonished and impressed when you introduced us to a handheld bioreactor, literally something you can hold in your hand. Can you talk about that?
Yes, I would love to. So one of the things that we did starting out the company and looking at our technology is we identified that we really needed to scale it in a different way. Historically, it's been done in roller bottles, which are very cumbersome and very hard to scale and manage. And so what we started to do was to look at new technology that's out on the marketplace, and we found a fixed bed bioreactor that is literally the size of a Coke can, and it has models that are a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger so that you can scale up further. But we did some initial work to see if we could basically grow the cells in a way that was efficient enough that we could make and produce the vector that we needed to at scale. Again, that's been one of the trickiest parts of the manufacturing puzzle for the cell and gene space, and no one had really cracked it to my understanding. And so we started to do some work, but we really first needed to understand, are those cells growing in that matrix evenly? That was some of the challenges with some of the earlier fixed bed bioreactors. And so we literally took that bioreactor, Perry, that you saw in that picture. We cut the top off after the cells had grown, and we did hundreds of samples throughout the bioreactor to understand if the cells were growing in a way that was consistent and that they were spreading correctly and they looked healthy, basically. Happy cells are the best cells to work with. And so we identified that everything looked really great in that vector. And so we are able to produce enough vector out of this tiny little bioreactor that's literally the size of a Coke can. And, for ultra rare conditions, for sure, we could dose patients, enough patients probably for the entire world's population, literally out of that one single bioreactor run. And so it's really incredible to see that we're doing additional work on that technology. We're scaling it up further so that we can go into a GMP system, but it's still able to be held in the palm of your hand. It's just whether it's a Coke can or it's a little bit bigger, that it's just amazing. And we're really excited about the technology and some of the work that we're doing in the development spaces.
It is amazing. It's just something else. So we're going to bring it even a little more to your role as Chief Commercial
Okay.
Officer. And, up until now, we're talking about this very complex space and what you do. Now, how do you communicate that? You're responsible for all of the business and collaborations that you speak about.
Yeah.
So how do you communicate that to your various target audiences and engage with them in a way, and they don't have a lot of time. You already mentioned how busy
Right.
they are. So what's your strategy? How do you do that?
Yeah, so I think at a very big high level, my strategy or how I could explain it is that I really started a marketing strategy and approach from the ground up and from literally scratch. There was almost nothing to start with. And, what really, and it's interesting to me, it never varies whether you're talking to a scientist, a sourcing agent, whoever the person is on the other side of the table. It's really important to understand your segmentation. So who's going to care about what you have to offer, and literally what makes them tick, what is important to them. And I think when you start to identify those things, it's the initial stages. And so some of the earliest things we did was we went out and tried to understand the marketplace a little bit more specifically to really hone in on that segmentation. And what we found for Cell and Gene is that the segmentation, it's kind of two different personas, if you will. One is kind of an innovator in that academic space, doing R&D and working to translate those ideas and those molecules out into the clinical space. And then generally speaking, it's the small biotech that's also doing that innovation, maybe with some different resources in hand to do that. And so we basically, go out and we segment the market, and we have different partners and different tools that we use to reach out to people and see who we want to talk to and where there's a business fit and what we can do. And being at a small startup, it's, I started as a team of one. And so you have to identify, your resources and how you can get some things done, because at the end of the day, one person can't do everything. So you really have to go out to your network and find who they might be working with, who's good, what you might need, and how to resource that. For instance, when I came on board, we really wanted to revamp the website, and we were on a really quick path to do so. And I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine, and he recommended someone that his small company was working with, and that person came on board for me and really helped bring that project through the finish line much faster. And I had a really good piece of advice when I started my position at Vintabio. I think as somebody who came from a big company before and always having worked with big companies, this is how it was put. Your network when you're at a big company is the people that you work with and how you can get things through your organization, your matrix organization. But when you're at a small startup, it's your external network that becomes really important. And it's all the people that you've met along the way who can now come and help you with whatever resource you might need to help deliver your commercial plan. And there's a great piece of advice. And I've reached out to my network, and, I'm having an opportunity to work with someone who I worked with in my past life, who is in a stage where he wanted to come in and do some marketing, and head up some of the strategic and tactical marketing approaches. And it's very dynamic, but it's also a lot of fun and very rewarding at the end of the day. As I think through kind of the work streams of my commercial plan, there's a few elements. There's a lead generation, and we've partnered with external resources to do kind of a digital marketing approach and reach out. We utilize them to test messaging. They have access to lists of clients and potential people. And so we'll do a number of different campaigns, and it's yielded some really good results so far. And then we also have partners that we've outsourced things for, paid media content, where there are newsletters, and we have banner ads in those newsletters, and we are able to put some of our content out into that space on their website, because they already have an established connection as information, a source of information for the industry for cell and gene and bioprocessing. And we've reached out to branding companies for our website and website design, and we're getting ready to launch even a next version of our website. And on the horizon, we can't forget social media, because that's becoming a really important tool and channel to get the word out on your capabilities and what you have to offer. So at a very, high level, those are some of the activities that we have going on.
So you've been there a year. The company is about what, 4 years old, but you still refer to yourselves as a startup.
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe if you ask somebody else in the company, they would say we're in growth mode. And it just kind of depends on the definition and how strictly you follow the definition of a startup. And I think for me, it's a little bit of newness, and it's also just about how we are building this. But really, part of the challenge in the life science space in particular is that we're all scientists that work at Vintabio ultimately, and we're selling a product or service to scientists. And there's a certain amount of credibility that you have to show up with to really initiate a conversation, even to initiate a conversation, and then to carry on the conversation to where you find a business fit and you're doing work together and partnering together. And so, you have to amass your content strategy. You have to address that, and you have to understand that there is a basis of data that you have to show up to almost be credible, and to be able to have that meeting and then to carry that meeting forward. There's just a high level or threshold of data that a scientist wants to see to make sure that you know what you're talking about and that you can, fulfill the things that you're saying that you can. And so, part of our content strategy is, working through all of the, our posters, looking at all the graphs that we have, understanding what the market needs to see as far as proof points. And our content strategy is heavily aligned on developing the data packages to support all of the things that we need to do, white papers, application notes, depending on what it is that we're trying to accomplish.
That is that I find that fascinating. So your content strategy. So I picked up a book, probably I think it's got to be 20 years old now. I don't even
Okay.
think it's in print, called Influencing Scientists. It
Okay.
talked about the scientific mind, this high level of curiosity, and when they find something interesting, they immediately go to skepticism.
Yeah.
You're right inside that thought
Yeah.
process with your content plan.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can't also just show the very best data in the whole entire world because it looks false that way. And I think in my early careers, I would have all these beautiful collateral pieces to use in my sales process, and I actually never use them. Please don't tell any of the marketers from early in my career,
They
but
may hear about it.
yeah,
So
right, exactly. I personally felt that the versions of pictures on those pieces of collateral would show just the best of the best, and but it wasn't necessarily representative of the whole body of work. I mean, it's kind of, you hear these stories in the food marketing space where they'll take a picture of a box of Wheaties or a bowl of Wheaties, they'll take 100 or 1,000 shots and they'll put glue in the milk and all sorts of crazy things to make it look a certain way. And I think sometimes from a marketing standpoint, we have to be aware that if you make it look too perfect, then that is also another trigger for skepticism from the scientist, because you want it to be authentic. I think that's why we've seen a shift probably in the last 10 years or so to go to white papers where there's more data presented and there's more, it follows the logical flow of a scientific paper because that's what people know and they work with all the time. And I think that is possibly why we saw that shift. And I would put that shift at about 10 years ago.
yeah, that's really, of course, I'm a big, I'm a big advocate of that approach. I think it allows one to build trust by
Yeah.
sharing that kind of information freely. Really thought leadership, and in your case, with data at the center backing it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, really good. I want to go back to you talked about this external network. When you're at a big company, your network is internal.
Yes.
and now your network has moved outside because initially it was just you.
Yeah.
How do you approach that? Do you run into a problem and say, okay, now I need somebody who's in my network, or is it more intentional, or how do you go about that?
I think it's a little bit of identifying a need first. And then sometimes it's literally asking the question, okay, I need this. Do I know anybody who can help me identify how to the path to get that into my repertoire underneath my umbrella, if you will. And it just kind of depends. Some of it, if I go back to the story I told when I was looking for someone to help with some marketing efforts early, when I first started with Vintabio, I happened to have a conversation at a conference with someone and we got to talking, and I happened to go by and see his booth and I thought it looked great. And so that's how that became to be. So sometimes it's a little bit less planned and sometimes it's extremely intentional, and it just depends on what you need. Some of it's just even vetting out partners. I'm the other thing I've been really surprised about is how much mail I get just for people offering all sorts of services. And a lot of them are, you can tell they're not, it's not going to be useful and you don't get back to those people. But in some cases, you have a need and you either reach out to a company or maybe they've reached out to you. But in some cases, I've used my network to vet out different suppliers that I could partner with to see, hey, have you worked with this company or that company? What's been your experience, so that you can make a more educated decision, because it's just maybe one or two data points within your whole company that even knows of that particular organization. And so it kind of really depends, but it's very true that in a small working environment, when you have a really small team, that external network becomes really important and a great resource or a great source of information and guidance.
And who have you brought on? So you mentioned somebody who, if I heard you right, was a more of a strategic marketer, a planner.
Yes.
They're working with you. Who else do you have as part of your commercial team now?
Yeah, so as I started, I had a quick need to just really just kind of elevate the website a little bit, just enough. It was just the existing website when I stepped on board was really not optimal. And so as I started to go down that path, I brought in a marketer who is an individual consultant, and she loves to work with small biotechs. And so she really helped me, get booth assets built and help me take that website project across the finish line. That was hiring a consultant. Then well, still a consultant, actually. I'm leveraging a lot of external people just to get things done, but we brought in a project manager. We were initiating and starting our first client project, and I wanted to have a project manager who could basically kind of have one foot on the customer boat, if you will, and one foot in the operations internal boat, and kind of balancing the in-between space and making sure that we were delivering the project, but also managing the expectations and working really effectively with the actual client. So it's kind of that idea of internal customer versus external customer. So I brought her on board just because we had a client project starting and we really just wanted to start that off strongly and with good representation. So she was one of the first people I brought on as a consultant. And then after that, I brought on a fractional marketing person who I had worked with in the past. So he was part of my external network, and brought him to work at Vintabio. So it was a little bit of like bringing the band back together, but it's been a lot of fun, and we've been enjoying, working together. But it's still a super small team, and we're working to get bigger.
Very hard work, so
Yeah.
challenging, but so much fun. You
Yes.
seem to really be loving what you're doing.
Yes, definitely. It's a lot of fun, and it's a I had a long track record at big companies. I learned a lot of really best practice and good ways to get things done. And so it's been a lot of fun to come over to build something from scratch and to utilize all of the things that I've learned through my whole career. And I'm still amazed, I'm going back to some of the very earliest days in my career. I actually started in the lab a very long time ago at the Scripps Research Institute, and I was a molecular biologist as training. And I remember very early on coming into Vintabio, I was sitting down with one of the founders, and he, brought out a plasmid map and started to really explicitly explain it. And I looked at him and I said, "I've seen a plasmid map before," but it was, a long, 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 long time ago. But it's really fun that you can find yourself, in the later stage in your career, drawing on things that are from your very earliest part of your career, and it makes it really dynamic and a lot of fun.
Yeah. So if you're talking to a young person who's earlier on in their career, whether they're in business development, marketing, or a scientist like yourself, a lot of scientists move over into the business development side or commercial side of things. What advice would you have them? They say, "Boy, Jennifer, I want to be you one day." What would you tell them?
I would tell them to definitely take chances. I remember when I took my first sales job, I called a girlfriend of mine and she's like, "Ooh, sales, are you sure you want to do that?" And I was like, "Well, what else why not?" And so I would definitely say, go ahead and go for it, take the risks. But at the end of the day, just, have fun and try to build your skill set. So think of each position as a skill set or something that you can learn to take with you. Kind of what can you put in your back pocket for later on down in your career, and make sure that you have some diversity in your career, and then you'll be better positioned later on.
Great advice.
Yeah.
That's super. Well, thank you very much for being with me. So, how can our audience get in touch with you? How can they find you, Jennifer?
Yes. So I'm on LinkedIn at Jennifer Kingsley. And then at Vintabio, we have a website that's vintabio.com. And we have the info at vintabio.com comes to my email as well. But those are probably the easiest and fastest ways to reach out to me and find me.
Great. I've been speaking with Jennifer Kingsley. She is the Chief Commercial Officer at Vintabio. That's a contract development and manufacturing organization serving the cell and gene therapy space. Fascinating, fascinating world. Jennifer, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Perry. It's been a lot of fun. I really appreciate your time.